K9. German Shepherd, left to die in a tower of steel, until a poor elderly woman did something no one expected. A once proud K9 or German Shepherd, trained for danger and known for his loyalty, was left behind like broken equipment, wounded, starving, and trapped inside a forgotten tower of cold, twisted metal. His cries echoed through the silence, but no one came. Days passed. Hope faded. Until, one morning, a frail old woman with nothing but a grocery cart and a kind heart heard something that made her stop in her tracks. What she did next shocked the entire town, and it just might break your heart. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, we can keep bringing you more powerful and emotional stories just like this one. The wind howled across the outskirts of Oak Ridge, a small town surrounded by forgotten factories and rusting steel structures. Among them stood an abandoned construction site, a towering skeleton of iron beams and broken scaffolding. No one went near it anymore. Kids called it cursed. The elderly called it dangerous, and the city had long since erased it from maps and budgets. But somewhere deep inside that cold, silent structure, a faint whimper echoed through the iron maze. It was barely audible, like a wounded ghost. That sound came from Rex. Once a decorated military K9, Rex had served 2 tours overseas. He had sniffed out explosives, chased down enemies, and saved more lives than anyone could count. But when his last handler was killed during a mission, Rex was discharged and passed from shelter to shelter. The medals didn't mean much anymore. People feared him, said he was too aggressive, too broken. Eventually, a man took him in, claiming he wanted a guard dog. What Rex got instead was chains, darkness, and silence. The man had led Rex to the tower one night, dragging him up the metal steps with a chain collar. Rex had sensed something was wrong, but his training kept him obedient. At the top, the man yanked the chain off, threw down an old bowl of water, and left. He never came back. Days turned into nights, and the tower, once meant to rise into a symbol of progress, became Rex's prison. His paws were torn from pacing on sharp rust. His ribs showed beneath his matted fur. Rain pooled on the metal floor, mixing with blood and filth. But worse than the pain was the confusion. Where was his mission? Where was his partner? Why had everyone disappeared? A few blocks away, Eleanor Cartwright pushed her rusty shopping cart through the narrow alley behind the corner store. Her back was bent with age, and her coat was 2 winters too thin. She lived alone in a crumbling trailer and survived on odd jobs and canned soup. Most people in town ignored her. Some felt sorry, others judged. But no one knew that Eleanor had once been a nurse in the army. No one knew that she had held soldiers' hands as they bled out, or that she still wrote letters to mothers whose sons never came home. Her heart had seen war, and it had never quite healed. That morning, as Eleanor passed the old tower on her way back from collecting tossed-out bread, she heard something, faint, raw. It stopped her in her tracks. She listened, narrowing her eyes as the wind cut through the iron. There it was again, a low, hollow cry. Animal. Desperate. She looked up at the tower. No one could be in there, she murmured. Could they? She pushed her cart to the side, out of view, and carefully stepped over the loose fence. Every creak of metal made her flinch, but she followed the sound, slowly, painfully, climbing the rusty stairs. Halfway up, the smell hit her. Rot, rust, and something alive. She reached the top, breathless and shaking, and that's when she saw him. A German Shepherd, barely moving, his eyes sunken but still alert. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just looked at her, as if he wasn't sure if she was real. Eleanor dropped to her knees. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What did they do to you?" Rex's ears twitched. A stranger's voice, soft and trembling, but not cruel. She didn't look like a soldier. She didn't look like a threat. She smelled like old wool and canned beans and something else. Comfort. He took one weak step toward her, then collapsed. Eleanor crawled closer and placed a hand gently on his side. "You're not dying here," she said. "Not while I'm breathing." And with those words, something changed. In the middle of the coldest tower in town, two forgotten souls, one canine, one human, found each other in the silence. And while no one else in Oak Ridge had noticed the cries from above, one poor elderly woman had heard them loud and clear. But getting Rex down would be another story. He was over 80 pounds of bone and muscle, and Eleanor could barely carry a bag of groceries. Still, she had made up her mind. She was not going to leave him. Not now. Not ever. And as she looked out over the town from the top of the tower, she knew the real rescue had only just begun. The morning sky was starting to turn gray by the time Eleanor descended the first few steps of the tower. Her knees trembled under her own weight, let alone the burden of what she had to do next. Behind her, Rex remained curled on the cold platform, barely conscious, his head resting on one paw. She kept glancing back at him, as if afraid that if she looked away for too long, he might vanish into the rust and shadows. She reached the bottom with a gasp, gripping the iron railing like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her heart pounded hard in her chest. Her arthritis flared with every movement. But her mind was sharp, sharper than it had been in years. "I can't carry you, boy," she muttered to herself, leaning against the gate as she thought. "But I can figure something out. I've got to." Back in her trailer, Eleanor had an old gardening wagon with two half-broken wheels. She used it to haul firewood or bottles to recycle. It was small, low to the ground, but maybe, just maybe, she could make it work. She made the painful walk back home as quickly as her body allowed, her breath puffing out in clouds. When she reached the trailer, she yanked the tarp off the wagon, grabbed a few old towels and a frayed blanket, and stuffed them inside. She didn't have money for a vet, but she had instincts. She'd tended to soldiers in worse shape than Rex. She just needed to get him home. When she returned to the tower with the wagon bouncing behind her, Rex was still there, still breathing. Barely. "It's all right," she whispered as she approached, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm not gonna hurt you." "I promise." He lifted his head slowly, recognizing her scent again. It wasn't strong, but it was familiar now, safe. She kneeled beside him and unfolded the blanket. Gently, with shaking hands, she touched his side again. This time, he didn't flinch. It took nearly 20 minutes for Eleanor to coax him into the wagon. He whimpered when she moved his hind legs. One of his paws was swollen, maybe broken, and his ribs felt wrong under her fingers. But he didn't bite. He didn't fight. He let her work, even though every movement was pain. Finally, she tied the blanket loosely over him and began to pull. The road home was long, with broken sidewalks and sharp gravel. The wheels squeaked and snagged on every uneven patch, and Eleanor gritted her teeth against the pain in her back. She pulled with everything she had, stopping every few minutes to check on Rex and catch her breath. Her hands were blistered, her eyes burning from the cold wind, but she never let go of the handle. Neighbors peeked from windows as she passed, but no one came out. People had learned to look the other way when it came to Eleanor Cartwright. Just an old woman with a cart full of junk, or so they thought. If only they knew that inside that squeaky wagon lay a war hero betrayed and forgotten. When she finally reached the edge of her trailer lot, Eleanor nearly collapsed. But with one last surge of strength, she dragged the wagon to the back door, opened it with a trembling hand, and pulled Rex inside. He whined softly as she lowered him onto a pile of folded towels near the space heater. She sat beside him on the floor, wiping the crust from his eyes with a wet rag and spooning a bit of canned tuna into a bowl. His nose twitched. "That's it," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. That's what food smells like. He licked at the tuna, weakly, but he ate. That night, Eleanor didn't sleep. She stayed next to him, feeding him water from a spoon, watching his chest rise and fall. Every few hours, she whispered stories from her past, about the nurses in Vietnam, about a soldier named Henry who never came home, about the way war changes everything, even when the war is over. Rex listened. He didn't move much, but he listened. Outside, Oak Ridge went on like nothing had changed. But inside that little trailer, something extraordinary was beginning. A healing neither of them had expected. A bond neither of them had asked for, but now couldn't imagine losing. But just as peace began to settle in, a sound cut through the silence. A car. Slowing down outside Eleanor's trailer. A door slamming. Then a knock, firm, demanding, on the front door. Eleanor's heart jumped. She stood slowly, shielding Rex with her body. Someone had noticed. And not everyone came with kindness in their heart. The knock came again, louder this time. Eleanor froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the curtain near the door, just enough to peek outside without being seen. A black SUV was parked on the gravel road, its engine still running. Two men stood at the steps, one in a leather jacket, the other in a faded military coat. The second man, taller, square-jawed, carried a clipboard under his arm. His eyes scanned the trailer like he already knew what was inside. Eleanor's pulse thudded in her ears. Rex stirred behind her. He wasn't asleep, hadn't been since the knock. The sound had pulled something deep from within him, something he didn't recognize at first. He was still weak, his body aching and bruised, but his instincts remained sharp. The knock, the voices, the tone. Something about it felt familiar, like orders being barked across a training field or boots on gravel before a mission. The man in the coat stepped forward. "Ma'am?" His voice was deep, but not cruel. "We're looking for a German Shepherd that was reported missing. Former military unit, K9 designation. Rex." Eleanor's breath caught. Rex. That name hadn't been said aloud in years. Behind her, the dog lifted his head, ears twitching. Something in him reacted. The name, the way it was spoken. He didn't understand everything, but he recognized that. A part of his brain, long dormant, lit up. He struggled to stand, but his legs gave out beneath him again. Eleanor turned toward him. "Is that your name, boy?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Rex?" He blinked, his body tense. She stood, wiped her hands on her skirt, and opened the door just enough to step outside, blocking the view inside the trailer. "I don't know anything about a missing dog," she said calmly. "This is private property." The man showed her the clipboard. "We got a call. Someone spotted a dog being pulled through town in a wagon. He matches the description of a military canine we've been trying to track. He went missing from a training compound a few towns over." Eleanor didn't flinch. "And what makes you think my dog has anything to do with that?" "Because that dog was declared dangerous, aggressive, should have been put down after he was decommissioned, but someone took him, dumped him in a construction site. Now he's back on the radar." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You people trained him to fight, then discarded him when he couldn't do it anymore. He's not dangerous. He's broken. And I'm not giving him back to anyone who left him to die." The man in the leather jacket stepped forward. "Ma'am, we don't want trouble, but this dog is military property. If you're harboring him, it could be considered theft." "I'm not harboring anything," she snapped. "I'm saving a life." They exchanged glances. The taller man softened just slightly. "Ma'am, if he's really Rex, he was one of the best we had. He saved lives. But after his last handler died, he lost control. bit too trainers, no one wanted to put him down, so they shelved him, out of sight, out of mind. Eleanor's throat tightened. And left him in a metal tower to starve? We didn't know he was there. Well, I did. She stood firm, rooted like an old oak. And I'm not letting you take him. They hesitated. Then the taller man pulled a card from his coat and handed it to her. We'll be back in 2 days, he said quietly. If he's still alive, we'll need proof he's safe. We owe him that much. He turned and both men walked back to the SUV. The engine started and they drove away without another word. Inside, Rex was trembling, not from fear but from something else. A storm of memory, instinct, and confusion. The name, the voice, the uniform, it was somewhat all tangled up in his mind, like barbed wire. Eleanor closed the door, heart pounding, and rushed to his side. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're safe. I won't let them take you." Rex let out a low, soft sound, something between a sigh and a growl. He pressed his muzzle into her hand. That night, Eleanor sat by his side again. The heater hummed softly. She fed him more tuna, wrapped him in blankets, and whispered the name over and over. Rex, Rex, Rex. He watched her. Something in his eyes shifted. He was remembering. But time was running out. In 2 days, they'd come back. And if Rex wasn't stronger, if he wasn't healed enough to prove himself, they'd take him away. Or worse. And Eleanor knew she had only one chance left to save him, for good. The next morning, the sky over Oak Ridge was thick with clouds, casting a pale gray light over Eleanor's trailer. Inside, she was already awake, kneeling beside Rex as she wiped his fur with a damp cloth. His eyes followed her every move now, no longer glazed or drifting, but focused, aware. The name had brought something back. Not just memory, but fight. She saw it in the way he lifted his head, in the tiny flex of his paw as he tried to stand again. "You're not done yet, soldier," she whispered, her fingers brushing gently across his cheek. "We've got 48 hours to prove them wrong." He blinked, his ear twitching. She took it as a sign. Outside, she rolled the wagon to the edge of her porch and gathered what little she had. A soft leash made from an old jump rope, a few tennis balls, a water bowl, and scraps of leftover chicken she had saved in her fridge. It wasn't much, but it was what she had. Eleanor had nursed dying men back to life with less. The first attempt to get Rex to stand lasted all of 6 seconds. His back legs buckled under him, and he groaned softly, panting. Eleanor didn't push. She just sat with him, her hand on his back. "You don't need to run," she said gently. "Just stand. Just one step at a time." By noon, with her guiding him every inch of the way, Rex had managed to take 4 shaky steps across the living room rug. Each one left him trembling, but she saw it in his eyes. Determination. By afternoon, she laid a trail of chicken pieces from the couch to the back door. It took nearly an hour, but he followed them, sniffing, limping, driven by something beyond hunger. Eleanor held her breath as he made it to the door. When he reached the last piece, he sat on his haunches and looked up at her. "Good boy," she said softly, her voice cracking. She clipped the makeshift leash around his neck and opened the door. The cold air rushed in, making them both flinch. But Rex didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped outside. The backyard was nothing but dead grass and rusting tools, but to Eleanor, it might as well have been a training ground. She walked slowly beside him, one hand on his back. Every few feet, she stopped and whispered commands. Not sharp, not loud, but calm, confident. Sit. Stay. Heal. At first, he didn't respond. But as the wind rustled the trees and the scent of the air changed, something flickered in him. A spark. He sat slowly, then stood, then turned to face her. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was obedience, and it was enough to bring Eleanor to tears. The next day, she woke before sunrise, lit a fire in the old stove, and cooked the last of her frozen ground beef. She let the scent fill the trailer, hoping it would strengthen him. When she looked over her shoulder, she saw Rex sitting up on his own for the first time, tail tapping slowly against the floor. "I hope you're hungry," she said, smiling. They trained all morning. She improvised with everything she had: a mop for a tunnel, plastic bottles as cones, a wooden stick for jumps. Rex struggled, stumbled, even collapsed once, but he never gave up, and neither did she. By sunset, he was following her around the yard without the leash, still limping, still sore, but alive and proud. That evening, as she sat with him on the front steps, Eleanor leaned back and watched the clouds break just enough for the stars to peek through. "You don't have to be a soldier anymore," she said softly, "but you deserve to be seen for what you are: brave, loyal, strong." Rex laid his head on her knee. Inside, the clock ticked. Less than 12 hours left. Tomorrow morning, they would come back, with their clipboards, their rules, and their judgment. But Eleanor was no longer afraid, because Rex wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting, and so was she. But what neither of them knew was that someone had been watching. A pair of eyes from across the street, a neighbor who had seen Rex in the yard, and who had just made a phone call that would change everything. Eleanor stood in the doorway as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow on the dew-covered yard. Rex was already up, limping in slow circles near the garden fence, his ears perked, tail slightly wagging. He had grown stronger overnight. She could feel it in his steps, see it in the way he watched her. No longer just surviving, but engaged, aware. She took a sip of her coffee, the steam warming her face. Her hands trembled, not just from age, but from anticipation. The men would be back soon. She didn't know exactly when, but she could feel it in her bones. They would come with questions, with tests, maybe even with force, but she wasn't going to let them take him without a fight, not after everything they had been through. She stepped down from the porch and knelt beside Rex. "Today, we show them who you are," she whispered, "not what they left behind." Across the street, behind slightly parted blinds, someone was watching again. Her name was Melissa Green, 42, a single mom with 2 teenage sons and a part-time job at the library. She lived 2 trailers down and had kept to herself mostly. People in Oak Ridge didn't gossip much anymore. Life was too hard, too fast, and too busy for neighborhood bonding. But Melissa had noticed Eleanor. She had seen her dragging that wagon through town. She had seen the way the dog, skinny, limping, but regal, had looked at the old woman like she was the last safe place in the world. And last night, she'd made a call. Not to the authorities, not to animal control. She had called her brother. Alex Green, a retired canine handler who now volunteered with an independent dog rescue in Portland. When she explained what she'd seen, what she suspected about the dog's past, Alex didn't hesitate. "Send me the address," he'd said. "I'm coming first thing in the morning." Now, as Eleanor brushed Rex's coat and checked the swelling in his paw, a new vehicle pulled into the lot. Not the black SUV from before, but an old red pickup with out-of-state plates. Eleanor stood, shielding Rex with her body again, cautious but curious. A tall man in his late 40s stepped out, dressed in worn jeans, boots, and a faded military hoodie. He moved with the ease of someone who had worked with dogs his whole life. As he approached, he raised both hands in peace. "Ma'am, I'm not here to take him away," he said. "I'm here to help. My name's Alex. Your neighbor Melissa called me." Eleanor frowned, but didn't move. "What for?" "She said you rescued a dog. A German Shepherd, possibly ex-military. She described him, and I knew the story. Alex took a slow step forward. If he's who I think he is, that dog's been through hell. Rex was watching the man now, tense, but not growling. His eyes scanned Alex's face, his posture. Something familiar again, like an old scent on the wind. Alex crouched low, holding still. "Hey, buddy, you remember base camp? Remember the smell of the sandbags and the hum of the chopper blades?" His voice softened. "You were a legend. You know that? The bravest damn dog in the whole battalion." Rex inched closer, one paw at a time. Eleanor didn't stop him. When Rex finally reached the man, he paused, then nudged his nose into Alex's palm. Alex's eyes filled with tears. "That's him," he whispered. "No doubt about it." Eleanor exhaled deeply, the tension in her chest loosening. "They said they're coming to take him back. Said he was military property. Dangerous." "They don't own him anymore," Alex said firmly. "The moment they left him in that tower, they gave up that right. If he was truly decommissioned, which it sounds like he was, they can't legally reclaim him, especially not after abandoning him." Eleanor's shoulders relaxed, but only slightly. "Then what do we do?" "We give them a reason to walk away," Alex said. "I've got connections. I'll call my rescue unit, file the paperwork. But more importantly," he looked at Rex, "we prove that this dog isn't dangerous. He's loyal. He's healing. And he belongs with someone who sees him, not someone who used him." A second car pulled into the driveway, the black SUV. They were back. Eleanor stood tall. Alex didn't move, and Rex? He stood between them, his posture straight, his ears alert. For the first time in weeks, he looked like a soldier again. And this time, he had a whole team behind him. The two men from the black SUV stepped out with grim expressions. The taller one, the same officer who had visited Eleanor days earlier, carried a folder under one arm. The other man, younger and colder, kept his hands clasped behind his back like he was ready to issue commands at any second. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She stood beside Rex with her hand resting lightly on his back. Alex moved forward calmly, his stance grounded, shoulders squared. "Morning," the officer said. "We came to check on the animal." "You mean the war hero?" Alex replied evenly. "Name's Rex, and I've already confirmed his ID." The officer frowned. "And you are?" "Alex Green, former handler, K9 Division. Retired. I now work with Northwest K9 Rescue. We've already started paperwork to take custody of this dog, legally." The younger man scoffed. "You can't just claim him. That dog's been flagged as a liability. We have records of violent behavior. He was never cleared for civilian adoption." Alex stepped aside and gestured to Rex. "Does he look dangerous to you?" Rex was standing between Eleanor and Alex, calm, focused, head high. The swelling in his paw had gone down, and while he still had a slight limp, his stance was strong. His eyes didn't leave the men. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't aggressive either. He was watching, assessing, like he had a mission again. "I've rehabilitated dogs worse off than him," Alex continued. "And this one? He's responding to commands. He's bonded. He's safe." Eleanor stepped forward. "He's more than safe. He saved me." The officer opened his folder. "We still need proof. We need to observe him. See how he reacts to stimuli, strangers, commands. You understand? It's procedure." Alex nodded. "Then let's do it." The younger man raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the old woman trained him?" "No," Alex says, "I'm saying she gave him something we couldn't. Hope. And that's what brought him back." They moved to the yard, Where Eleanor had set up a few obstacles with crates, cones, and old furniture, Alex walked Rex through basic commands: sit, stay, heel. Then he added more: retrieving a tennis ball, responding to hand signals, stopping mid-run on command. Rex performed each with slight hesitation, but there was no sign of aggression. No fear. Just effort. Then came the final test. The officer motioned to his partner. Approach him, fast, see what he does. The younger man nodded and began walking toward Rex with quick, sharp steps. Eleanor stiffened. Rex tensed, his ears snapping up, his body coiling. The man came within feet, then reached his arm forward as if to grab Alex. In an instant, Rex moved. He lunged, not to attack, but to block. He stepped between Alex and the man, barking once, loud and sharp, his body firm, tail straight. A warning, but he didn't bite. He didn't jump. He didn't lose control. He protected. And when Alex gave a sharp, down, Rex obeyed instantly. Silence fell. The officer stared. His younger partner looked shaken. He didn't attack, Alex said firmly. He reacted like a trained protector. Controlled, focused. That dog's no liability. He's a hero. The older man closed the folder. Slowly. Eleanor stepped closer. So? What happens now? The officer met her eyes for a long moment. Then he sighed. I was there, you know, he said softly. Overseas, when Rex found a bomb under a medic's tent. He saved 13 men that day, including me. He looked down at the dog. They said he snapped after his handler died, that he couldn't be fixed, but maybe they were wrong. Eleanor's voice trembled. They were. He nodded once. I'll sign off on the release. No further claims from the department, but I want reports, regular ones. I want to know how he's doing. Alex extended his hand. You'll get them. The SUV pulled away a few minutes later, kicking up dust as it disappeared down the road. Eleanor dropped to her knees in the grass. You did it, she whispered to Rex, stroking his fur as tears filled her eyes. You really did it. Rex leaned into her touch, then gently licked her hand. He was home. But just as peace began to return, Alex's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down at the screen and frowned. What is it? Eleanor asked. He looked up, his expression suddenly serious. There's been a break-in at the rescue center. Someone let the dogs out. All of them, and no one knows where they are. Rex stood at attention, his ears twitching, his instincts awakening. Because some heroes never really stop serving. Within minutes, Alex had explained everything. A local gang had broken into the rescue center, tearing through the gates and scattering the dogs into the nearby forest. Many were injured or terrified, and time was running out to bring them back safely. Eleanor looked at Rex. He was standing tall again. Not as the broken soul she found in the tower, but as the protector he was born to be. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Alex asked. I think he already knows, Eleanor replied. Rex moved first, toward the truck. No leash, no command, just purpose. By nightfall, Rex had already tracked 2 frightened pups hiding near a creek bed. Alex followed close behind, and Eleanor waited at the edge of the forest, her hands clasped to her chest, praying silently. When she saw Rex emerge from the trees, leading the 2 dogs with gentle nudges, her heart swelled. He had found them. He had brought them home. One by one, Rex led the search. Not for glory, not for orders, but for them. For the ones left behind, just like he once was. He wasn't just rescued. He had become the rescuer. Rex never returned to the cold silence of that steel tower. Instead, he spent the rest of his days in a warm home, filled with love, chicken stew, and quiet moments on the porch beside Eleanor. But more than that, he became a mentor to other rescues. A guide, a symbol of what healing looks like when someone believes in you. And Eleanor? She was never alone again. Because when you save a soul, sometimes that soul saves you right back. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Let's keep spreading stories of courage, love, and redemption, one hero at a time.